No one is your friend in the way you hope. People are kind when it is convenient. People are loyal when it costs them nothing. People smile when they benefit and disappear when their comfort is threatened. This is not cruelty, it is reality. The mistake is expecting devotion, honesty, or sacrifice from those who are guided by self-interest. You can hope, you can wish, you can trust, but until someone proves themselves through repeated action, their words are meaningless. Trust is the most dangerous currency. Hand it freely, and you risk betrayal. Guard it, and you remain in control of your life. Watch how people behave when there is nothing to gain and everything to lose. Observe them in discomfort, under pressure, and when temptation calls. True character is revealed not in moments of ease, but in moments of trial. The kindest smile can hide a calculated mind. The softest words can mask intentions that will cut you when you are vulnerable. Do not confuse friendship with proximity. Someone can be near you, laugh with you, and nod in agreement, and still be willing to act against your interest if opportunity presents itself. Attachment clouds judgment. We want to believe, we want connection, so we ignore signs. We rationalize behavior, excuse flaws, and invent loyalty that does not exist. Attachment blinds you to truth and leaves you exposed. Be calm, but vigilant. Be respectful, but discerning. Let people reveal themselves slowly, over time, in a pattern of action, not just promises. Observe without telling, listen without responding, and remember that silence often shows more than conversation ever will. Actions speak when words are empty. Character is proven when convenience disappears. Self-reliance is your strongest armor. Do not hand over your security, plans, or vulnerabilities to anyone untested. The less you depend on another for your survival, your growth, or your peace of mind, the more freedom you have. When you can stand alone, you can choose relationships intentionally rather than out of necessity. You protect your life and your energy when you know that no one is obligated to be loyal or consistent. People reveal themselves under pressure. They are impatient, selfish, or fearful when they are tested. Some crumble, some attack, and some vanish. Those who remain consistent, calm, and principled under strain are rare. Watch and learn. Trust is earned slowly through observation, not claimed through conversation. Silence is your greatest tool. Observe. Measure. Wait, speak less than you think you need to, because those who speak most often reveal least. The quiet mind sees patterns, motives, and inconsistencies more clearly than the one desperate to respond, justify, or impress. The world does not owe you truth. You must discover it through attention and reflection. Discernment is your shield, not bitterness. Being careful is not cruelty, and caution is not paranoia. It is intelligence applied to reality. It is the ability to separate wishful thinking from evidence, perception from desire. To trust blindly is weakness. To trust selectively, based on proof and consistent action, is wisdom. Protect your mind and heart. Measure the value of those around you by what they do, not what they say. Remember, loyalty is earned. Respect is earned. Trust is earned. Few will cross the line to protect another at their own cost. Most will act in self-interest first and kindness second, if at all. Accept this truth and you gain power. Accept it and you are no longer naive. Accept it and you can navigate the world with awareness rather than disappointment. Do not let hope or desire cloud perception. Do not let attachment blur judgment. Do not mistake smiles for allegiance or proximity for trust. Watch, observe, and measure over time. Protect yourself, because when it matters most, no one is guaranteed to stand by your side. The world is human. People are human. And humans act according to benefit, fear, and comfort before principle. Let your life, your decisions, and your trust be guided by observation, proof, and consistency. Let caution protect your energy and clarity guide your choices. Let action be your measure of character, not words. You are responsible for your own stability, your own growth, and your own peace. Trust is a gift to be given sparingly, earned relentlessly, and never assumed. Stand alone when you must. Be silent when observation is required. Guard your plans, your vulnerabilities, and your ambitions. Accept that most will not understand, many will not care, and few will be consistent. This is not pessimism, it is realism. The world is full of faces that smile, hands that offer, and voices that promise. Look deeper. Observe the pattern of action. Evaluate by what is proven, not what is spoken. Be strong enough to act without dependency. Be patient enough to watch without interference. Be wise enough to trust only when evidence aligns with principle. The cost of misplaced trust is high, and the consequences are real. Protect yourself not through suspicion alone, but through clarity, observation, and disciplined action. In a world where few are true friends, self-reliance, discernment, and patience are your most powerful allies. Trust is earned through consistency, not words. Words are easy to produce and almost nothing. Anyone can promise loyalty, honesty, support, or care. Anyone can say what another person wants to hear in the moment. But words are weightless unless they are backed by repeated action over time. Consistency is what gives trust its substance. Without it, trust is only hope disguised as belief. Human beings are naturally drawn to language. We remember what people say more clearly than what they do, especially when their words flatter us or align with our desires. This is why manipulation often begins with speech. Compliments, reassurance, and confident promises create an illusion of safety. But consistency is slower and less dramatic. It requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to show up the same way regardless of mood, benefit, or audience. Most people cannot maintain this for long, and that is why consistency reveals character more accurately than any declaration. Trust grows when actions align with words again and again, especially in small, unremarkable moments. Anyone can act correctly once. Anyone can be generous when it is convenient. Anyone can be supportive when there is nothing to lose. Consistency appears when circumstances change and behavior does not. It appears when there is pressure, fatigue, temptation, or risk. And the person still acts according to the same principles. This repetition is what allows the mind to relax because predictability creates safety. Inconsistency, on the other hand, creates confusion. A person who is kind one day and dismissive the next forces others to constantly adjust their expectations. This instability drains energy and attention. The mind begins to question, to anticipate disappointment, to stay alert. Even if the words remain positive, inconsistency erodes trust silently. Over time, people stop listening to what is said and focus only on what is done, because experience has taught them that speech cannot be relied upon. Consistency also demonstrates self-control. To act the same way repeatedly requires regulation of impulse and emotion. It means not reacting impulsively, not changing values based on advantage, and not abandoning commitments when they become inconvenient. This kind of discipline signals reliability. It shows that a person is governed by something deeper than temporary feelings. Trust naturally flows toward those who are internally stable because their presence feels grounded rather than chaotic. Many relationships fail because trust is given too early, based on words rather than patterns. Early enthusiasm often disguises inconsistency. Someone may appear attentive, supportive, and invested in the beginning, only to withdraw once familiarity replaces novelty. The mistake is not in wanting connection, but in mistaking intensity for consistency. Intensity is emotional and short-lived. Consistency is quiet and enduring. One creates excitement, the other creates safety. Consistency also includes accountability. When actions fall short, a consistent person acknowledges the failure and corrects it. They do not deflect blame or rewrite the story. This reinforces trust because it shows alignment between values and behavior, even when mistakes occur. In contrast, someone who speaks about integrity but avoids responsibility reveals a fracture between their identity and their actions. Over time, this gap widens and trust dissolves. Trust earned through consistency is not blind. It is built slowly through observation. It does not require constant reassurance because evidence accumulates naturally. Each repeated action becomes a data point. Each kept promise strengthens the structure. This kind of trust is resilient because it is grounded in reality rather than expectation. It does not collapse easily under stress because it has already survived many tests. In professional environments, consistency is often valued more than talent. A person who delivers reliably, meets deadlines, and maintains standards earns confidence, even if they are not exceptional. Meanwhile, someone who speaks confidently but performs unpredictably creates risk. Organizations, like individuals, depend on trust to function. Without it, systems become inefficient, layered with checks and controls to compensate for unreliability. Consistency reduces friction because it allows others to plan without fear of disruption. On a personal level, consistency shapes reputation. Over time, people become known not for what they claim, but for what they repeatedly do. Reputation is simply the memory of consistent behavior stored in other people's minds. Once formed, it is difficult to change because it is reinforced by expectation. This is why inconsistency early on is dangerous. It sets a pattern that others learn to anticipate. Trust also requires patience from the one who seeks it. Wanting to be trusted without demonstrating consistency is a form of entitlement. It assumes that intention should be valued more than action. But trust does not respond to intention, it responds to evidence. This is not cruelty or skepticism, but realism. The world teaches through consequence, not promise. Those who understand this do not rush to persuade. They allow their actions to speak, knowing that consistency will eventually be noticed. They do not demand trust. They create conditions for it to grow. This quiet confidence is often mistaken for indifference, but it is rooted in discipline. It reflects an understanding that real credibility cannot be argued into existence. Consistency also protects against self-deception. When someone commits to acting according to their values repeatedly, they are forced to confront their own limitations. They see where effort drops, where excuses appear, where discipline weakens. In this way, consistency is not only a signal to others, but a mirror to oneself. It exposes gaps between identity and behavior, offering the opportunity to close them through practice rather than pretense. Words can inspire, comfort, and explain, but they cannot replace action. They are invitations, not guarantees. Consistency is the acceptance of that invitation over and over again, even when no one is watching, even when there is no immediate reward, even when silence would be easier. Trust formed this way does not depend on constant affirmation, because it is anchored in lived experience, reinforced by time, and sustained by the quiet certainty that behavior tomorrow will resemble behavior today, not because it is promised, but because it has already been proven through repetition and restraint in moments where a deviation would have been easier and more immediately rewarding than staying aligned with what was claimed to matter in the first place. Attachment clouds judgment because it binds perception to emotion rather than reality. When we become attached to people, outcomes, identities, or expectations, we stop seeing things as they are and start seeing them as we want them to be. The mind begins to protect what it is attached to, even when that attachment causes harm. This protection is subtle and often unconscious, which makes it dangerous. We believe we are thinking clearly, but our judgment is already compromised. Attachment creates bias. Once we care deeply about someone or something, we interpret information in a way that preserves the bond. We excuse behavior that would otherwise concern us. We minimize warning signs. We reinterpret disrespect as misunderstanding and manipulation as care. This is not because we are weak, but because attachment triggers fear of loss. The fear of losing what we value distorts our ability to assess truth objectively. The mind does not like discomfort. Attachment intensifies discomfort when reality threatens what we are holding on to. To reduce this discomfort, the mind adjusts perception rather than releasing attachment. This is how denial forms. Clear evidence can be present, but judgment bends to avoid emotional pain. In this state, logic serves emotion, not the other way around. Decisions made under attachment often feel justified in the moment and regrettable later. Attachment also narrows perspective. When emotionally invested, attention becomes selective. We focus on information that confirms our desire and ignore information that challenges it. This selective attention reinforces false confidence. We believe we are being fair while unknowingly filtering reality. Over time, this creates a distorted internal narrative that feels consistent but is disconnected from facts. In relationships, attachment often leads to overtrust. We assume loyalty, honesty, or competence without sufficient evidence because questioning feels threatening. To doubt feels like betrayal, so judgment is silenced. This is why people remain in harmful situations longer than logic would allow. They are not unaware, they are attached. The attachment makes leaving feel worse than enduring, even when endurance erodes dignity and stability. Attachment also interferes with boundaries. Clear judgment requires distance, but attachment pulls us closer, blurring lines. We tolerate behavior we would never accept from others. We compromise standards to preserve connection. Over time, this creates internal conflict because the mind senses imbalance while emotion resists change. The result is confusion, anxiety, and indecision. In decision-making, attachment increases risk. When outcomes matter too much emotionally, fear and hope overpower reason. People chase validation, status, or approval, mistaking emotional relief for long-term benefit. This leads to impulsive choices and poor timing. Judgment becomes reactive rather than deliberate. Instead of asking what is right, the mind asks what will preserve comfort or avoid loss. Attachment to identity is equally distorting. When we become attached to who we believe we are, we resist information that challenges that identity. Feedback feels like an attack. Growth feels like threat. Judgment becomes defensive, focused on protecting ego rather than understanding reality. This prevents learning because learning requires admitting limitation. Attachment to self-image traps us in stagnation while convincing us we are being authentic. Attachment also affects moral judgment. We judge others harshly for actions we excuse in those we are attached to. The same behavior is interpreted differently depending on emotional proximity. This inconsistency weakens integrity and self-respect. Over time, the mind becomes fragmented, holding contradictory standards without recognizing the contradiction. Detachment does not mean indifference. It means the ability to observe without being controlled by emotion. Clear judgment requires space between stimulus and response. Attachment collapses that space. Emotion rushes in and decides before awareness can intervene. Detachment restores that pause, allowing choice rather than reaction. Many mistakes are not caused by lack of intelligence, but by excessive attachment. Intelligent people make poor decisions when they are emotionally invested. This is why wisdom is often associated with restraint rather than knowledge. The ability to step back, to question one's own motives, and to tolerate discomfort is what protects judgment. Attachment thrives on immediacy. It wants reassurance now, resolution now, certainty now. Judgment requires patience. It requires waiting, observing patterns, and allowing clarity to emerge. When attachment dominates, waiting feels unbearable. Action is taken prematurely to relieve emotional tension, even if it creates long-term consequences. The cost of clouded judgment is cumulative. One compromised decision leads to another. Small concessions become habits. Over time, people find themselves far from where they intended to be, wondering how it happened. It happened gradually through moments where attachment overruled clarity and comfort was chosen over truth. Awareness of attachment is the first step toward clearer judgment. Noticing emotional pull without immediately obeying it creates distance. This distance allows perception to recalibrate. Reality becomes visible again, not as we wish it to be, but as it is. From this place, decisions become calmer, firmer, and more aligned with long-term stability rather than short-term emotional relief. Judgment is strongest when it is not owned by fear of loss. When we accept that everything is temporary, attachment loosens its grip. We still care, but we are no longer controlled. We can appreciate without clinging, commit without blindness, and choose without distortion. In this state, clarity is not forced. It arises naturally because the mind is no longer busy defending what it fears to lose. People reveal themselves under pressure because pressure strips away pretense. In ordinary circumstances, anyone can present a curated version of themselves. Smiles can be practiced, words carefully chosen, and intentions disguised. Social facades are maintained when there is comfort, routine, and predictability. But when the stakes rise, when fear, stress, or urgency enters, these masks often crack. The way a person responds to pressure exposes character more clearly than any conversation, claim, or promise ever could. Pressure acts as a magnifier. It amplifies tendencies that are normally hidden. A small impatience becomes a harsh reaction. A minor frustration escalates into anger. A slight insecurity transforms into blame. The mind, pressed by circumstance, defaults to patterns formed over a lifetime. Habits, beliefs, and instincts emerge in full force. Those who are disciplined, thoughtful, and principled remain consistent under pressure, while those who rely on performance or charm falter. It is not only stress that reveals truth, but also temptation and risk. When someone is offered advantage without accountability, the decision they make demonstrates priorities and integrity. A person may speak of fairness, generosity, or loyalty, yet when faced with opportunity to benefit at another's expense, their choices reflect reality. Pressure exposes the distance between words and actions. Promises become fragile, and intentions that were easy to declare become difficult to execute. The human tendency to protect self-interest becomes evident under pressure. Comfort and safety often dominate consideration, even when ethics or responsibility are at stake. Observing how people navigate high-pressure situations provides insight into what they value most, what motivates them, and how they define right and wrong. Often, those who appear calm or charming in daily life reveal hidden impatience, fear, or selfishness when outcomes are uncertain. Pressure also tests loyalty. Relationships, professional ties, and alliances face strain when external forces demand decisions or sacrifices. True loyalty is proven not when life is easy, but when challenges arise. Some individuals will bend under pressure, abandoning others to safeguard themselves. Others will act with courage, consistency, and honesty, even when doing so is difficult or dangerous. The difference is subtle at first, visible only in small choices, but accumulates over time to define trustworthiness. Stress often triggers emotional amplification. People under pressure react in ways they would not in calm conditions. Temper rises, judgment falters, and impulsive decisions become more frequent. Observing these reactions allows one to understand priorities and emotional regulation. Those who remain measured reveal self-control and inner stability, while those who act recklessly reveal susceptibility to external forces. Pressure also exposes resilience. Some individuals crumble under difficulty, abandoning goals or responsibilities, while others adapt, strategize, and persevere. This distinction is rarely revealed in comfort. The ability to persist under strain, to maintain composure and effectiveness, is a more reliable indicator of character than any public display or spoken commitment. Patterns emerge over repeated exposure to pressure. The first instance may reveal a minor flaw or an unexpected reaction, but continuous challenges create a mosaic of behavior. A single moment under pressure can be misleading, but recurring patterns are more revealing. Over time, these repeated behaviors define reliability, integrity, and true disposition. Pressure also tests empathy. When circumstances become intense, some people retreat into self-preservation, while others continue to consider the needs of those around them. The choice is made in such situations, whether to act selfishly or responsibly, to help or ignore, to speak truth or deceive, expose not only intelligence but moral orientation. These responses are often more revealing than any philosophical or ethical discussion ever could be. Trust is particularly affected by how people behave under pressure. A person who speaks boldly about loyalty or ethics may falter when their beliefs are tested. Conversely, someone who is reserved or unassuming may act decisively and honorably when the moment demands. Observing responses under pressure allows one to calibrate expectations accurately, distinguishing between rhetoric and reality. Pressure strips away social polish. Charm, eloquence, and superficial generosity are difficult to maintain when the mind is under strain. People reveal true instincts, revealing whether behavior is habitually performative or genuinely principled. The mask that social interaction often requires slips under the weight of responsibility, confrontation or adversity, allowing the unfiltered self to emerge. Fear and urgency are catalysts. People who speak with confidence but act out of fear under duress show how fragile their composure truly is. Some will lie, manipulate, or shift blame to preserve themselves, while others will remain accountable despite threat or discomfort. These reactions offer a clear window into priorities, resilience, and moral foundation. Pressure also reveals problem-solving capacity. When challenges intensify, those who plan carefully and act deliberately demonstrate clarity of thought, while those who panic or overreact expose impulsivity and poor judgment. How someone navigates difficulty reflects not only intelligence, but emotional regulation and the ability to balance short-term urgency with long-term consequences. Observing people under pressure requires attention and patience. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is in quiet choices. The decision to communicate honestly under risk, to persist quietly despite exhaustion, or to act ethically when the stakes are high. These moments may be subtle, but they carry more weight than grand gestures made without consequence. Patterns of behavior under pressure define reputations. People are remembered not for what they say in comfort, but for how they respond in crisis. Those who demonstrate consistency, integrity, and resilience gain credibility, while those who falter lose it. Reputation is largely a reflection of repeated behavior under conditions of stress rather than public declarations or appearances. Even small pressures reveal much. Minor irritations, unexpected setbacks, or simple inconveniences elicit responses that are instructive. Do people lash out, blame others, retreat, or take responsibility? These micro reactions are signals of deeper tendencies that become more pronounced under larger stressors. Observation over time paints a reliable portrait of character. Pressure is unavoidable, and its inevitability is what makes it a reliable test. Everyone experiences moments of challenge, confrontation, and uncertainty. Those who prepare mentally, emotionally, and ethically reveal strength in these moments, while those who rely on comfort and convenience reveal fragility. The lessons learned from observing responses under pressure are both practical and profound. Ultimately, the true self is less about the face presented to the world and more about the response when the world is demanding. Pressure strips away pretense, accelerates consequence, enforces decision. It tests honesty, integrity, patience, courage, and empathy simultaneously. How someone behaves in these moments, repeatedly and without external guidance, communicates more about who they are than any carefully curated persona. Self-reliance is protection, not isolation, because it is the conscious decision to depend on your own abilities, judgment, and resilience rather than placing your security entirely in the hands of others. Many misunderstand self-reliance as a form of withdrawal, imagining that it requires rejecting relationships, cutting ties, or turning inward to the point of loneliness. In reality, self-reliance is an armor forged through competence, discipline, and clarity, allowing a person to engage with the world without fear of being undermined by dependence on unreliable forces. It is the foundation of freedom, because when you are capable of standing alone, your choices are your own, unshaped by the constraints or whims of others. At its core, self-reliance begins with trust in one's own judgment. People who lack this trust often seek constant reassurance or guidance, relying on external validation for decisions, both small and large. This dependence exposes vulnerability because it places the power of your well-being in the hands of others. Self-reliance removes that vulnerability by honing the ability to assess situations, make decisions, and follow through without constant outside influence. You protect yourself from disappointment, manipulation, and instability. It is not a rejection of advice or collaboration. It is the refusal to make your stability contingent on the reliability of others. Self-reliance also manifests through competence. The more capable you are of meeting your own needs, financial, emotional, or practical, the less others can control you through leverage or obligation. Competence is the silent assertion of independence. It is the capacity to solve problems, navigate challenges, and act effectively in uncertainty. When you rely on your own abilities first, relationships with others become voluntary and equitable rather than transactional. You are not dependent on approval, assistance, or presence to sustain your life, which shifts the dynamics of interaction from necessity to choice. Many confuse self-reliance with isolation because it requires a willingness to be alone if necessary. The truth is, self-reliance does not demand permanent solitude. It requires that when others are absent, unreliable, or harmful, you can continue forward without collapse. Isolation is a reaction driven by fear or mistrust, whereas self-reliance is proactive strength. Being self-reliant means that your inner stability does not hinge on constant companionship or external support. You can form meaningful relationships, collaborate effectively, and enjoy company fully. But you do so from a position of security, not dependency. Self-reliance is a shield against manipulation and betrayal. People who are over-dependent on others for validation, resources, or emotional support are easily controlled, exploited, or deceived. The pressure to conform, comply, or placate becomes unavoidable when survival or success feels contingent on someone else's goodwill. Those who cultivate self-reliance experience a form of immunity. They maintain autonomy, choose alliances carefully, and engage with others consciously rather than reactively. The independence to say no, to withdraw, or to change direction without fear is a form of protection unavailable to those who rely excessively on others. Emotional self-reliance is equally critical. Dependence on others for emotional stability creates vulnerability to disappointment, rejection, and manipulation. If happiness, confidence, or self-worth fluctuates according to others' actions, mood, or approval, emotional life becomes precarious. Self-reliance strengthens emotional resilience. It allows you to acknowledge your feelings, process them, and act with clarity even in the face of provocation or adversity. When emotional control rests primarily within oneself, interactions are not driven by desperation or fear, but by choice, discernment, and awareness. Self-reliance also sharpens judgment. When you rely on your own observations, reasoning, and experience, you are forced to see reality clearly. Dependence often clouds perception, creating blind spots where hope, fear, or attachment distort truth. In contrast, self-reliant individuals face challenges directly. They measure situations independently, evaluate information critically, and act decisively. This clarity is not arrogance, it is protection. The more you can trust yourself to respond effectively, the less vulnerable you are to deception, influence, or coercion. Another aspect of self-reliance is preparation. Those who cultivate it anticipate challenges and develop solutions before crises arrive. They invest in skill, knowledge, and resourcefulness, creating a buffer between themselves and uncertainty. This preparation allows for freedom of movement in life. When circumstances shift, self-reliant individuals do not panic or flounder. They adjust, adapt, and continue forward. Others may depend on luck, guidance, or support. But self-reliant individuals operate from competence and foresight, which is a form of continuous protection. Self-reliance also fosters authenticity. When you are not constantly seeking approval, affirmation, or assistance, your choices reflect your values, not the expectations of others. It allows a person to live intentionally rather than reactively. People who are self-reliant are free to pursue goals, maintain principles, and express opinions without compromise dictated by fear of loss or social pressure. This freedom strengthens character and encourages relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than obligation. It is important to recognize that self-reliance is a practice, not a destination. It is cultivated gradually through experience, discipline, and reflection. It requires confronting discomfort, taking responsibility for mistakes, and learning from failure without relying excessively on others for rescue. Each instance of self-sufficiency builds confidence and fortifies resilience. Over time, the habitual application of self-reliance becomes second nature, forming a protective framework that allows interaction with the world without fear, attachment, or compromise of integrity. Self-reliance also allows discernment in relationships. When one is self-sufficient, relationships are entered intentionally rather than out of necessity. Dependence often forces people into situations or alliances that are unwise or harmful. Those who are self-reliant choose connections based on value and alignment rather than survival or convenience. This freedom from necessity creates space for meaningful, balanced, and mutually respectful interactions where neither party is coerced by need or vulnerability. In life, unexpected challenges are inevitable. People will fail, circumstances will shift, and support may vanish when it is most needed. Self-reliance ensures that these disruptions do not compromise stability. Those who can act, adapt, and sustain themselves independently are protected from chaos, betrayal, and disappointment. Self-reliance is therefore not a wall that separates, but a foundation that empowers, allowing one to navigate reality with clarity, resilience, and autonomy. Physical, emotional, and mental self-reliance intersect to form this protective strength. Physical competence allows survival and action. Emotional competence allows clarity and stability under stress. Mental competence allows judgment, foresight, and problem solving. Together, these forms of self-reliance create a person capable of engaging with the world fully without being dependent on the presence, approval, or reliability of others. Ultimately, self-reliance is a conscious embrace of autonomy, skill, and clarity. It enables freedom of choice, security under uncertainty, and resilience under adversity. It allows relationships to be voluntary rather than coerced, actions to be intentional rather than reactive, and life to be guided by competence rather than dependence. It protects from external forces that could destabilize or exploit, while still leaving room for connection, collaboration, and trust that is chosen rather than demanded. Self-reliance teaches that protection comes not from avoidance or isolation, but from strength, preparation, and clarity. It is the assurance that even in the absence of help, guidance, or support, one can navigate challenges, maintain integrity, and continue forward. It allows engagement with the world without fear of loss, manipulation, or betrayal, because the foundation of security resides within, cultivated deliberately, consistently, and consciously. Silence observes better than conversation, because when words are constantly flowing, perception becomes clouded by bias, reaction, and performance. Speaking demands attention, energy, and engagement, and while conversation can clarify or persuade, it can also distract from the subtle truths present in a situation. Words are tools, but they are also filters. They require framing, justification, and selection, which means the mind is focused more on articulation than observation. Silence, in contrast, allows perception to expand without interference, providing a deeper and more accurate understanding of people, circumstances, and self. When someone speaks, they are rarely neutral. Words carry intention, emotion, and strategy. They can mask motives, obscure uncertainty, or manipulate perception. Those who listen attentively but speak less are positioned to notice discrepancies between what is said and what is done. Patterns emerge in actions, tone, timing, and behavior that conversation alone cannot reveal. Silence allows one to observe these patterns without the interference of one's own reactive commentary, giving insight into both others and oneself. Silence also cultivates awareness. In conversation, attention is divided between listening, formulating responses, and managing impression. In silence, observation is undiluted. Facial expressions, body language, micro reactions, and environmental cues become clear. A word spoken is static, but behavior in silence is dynamic. A person's hesitation, glance, or subtle shift in posture can reveal thought processes, intentions, and emotional states that words may never capture. Observation in silence is not passive. It is active perception, a conscious gathering of truth that does not demand articulation. Listening without speaking also provides time for reflection. Immediate responses in conversation are often reactive rather than deliberate. Silence allows for processing, connecting dots, and interpreting context before forming judgments. Those who speak constantly may miss critical signals, reacting to noise rather than substance. Silence, by contrast, creates mental space where information can be assessed in its totality. It sharpens discernment and allows for the differentiation between what is performative and what is genuine. Silence encourages others to reveal themselves. People often fill quiet with words, sometimes unconsciously revealing more than they intend. When someone expects constant feedback or engagement, they speak in ways that expose patterns of thought, motivation, and temperament. Silence becomes a tool for observation, prompting transparency without confrontation. The person who is quiet observes behavior while allowing others to project character through their own speech. Over time, repeated interactions in silence provide a far richer understanding than any surface-level conversation could yield. The habit of silence develops patience and restraint, both critical for accurate perception. Those who speak impulsively risk exposing biases or making assumptions that distort understanding. Silence allows the mind to track information without prematurely categorizing or judging it. In observing without interruption, one can detect subtle contradictions, hidden agendas, and underlying truths that might be obscured by constant verbal engagement. Patterns of behavior, reliability, and character emerge more clearly when one is not focused on contributing words at every moment. Silence also sharpens emotional intelligence. Observing without speaking allows recognition of emotional undercurrents in interactions. Tone, cadence, pacing, and pauses carry meaning that words alone often obscure. People communicate far more through unspoken cues than through language. When one remains quiet, attention can shift entirely to these nonverbal signals, creating insight into motivations, fears, and intentions that might otherwise be masked by carefully chosen words. Understanding the emotional landscape of a situation is often more valuable than hearing verbal explanation, and silence provides the vantage point for such comprehension. Power dynamics are also revealed in silence. Some individuals become uneasy or impatient when met with quiet, unconsciously displaying anxiety, control impulses, or the need to dominate. Others remain composed, revealing confidence and self-possession. Silence acts as a mirror for character, allowing behavior to emerge naturally without interruption. The spoken word, by contrast, often introduces performance, manipulation, or distraction, masking the authentic self under layers of explanation or persuasion. Observing without speaking allows one to detect subtleties in timing and choice that conversation often conceals. The decision to speak, remain silent, or act at particular moments provides insight into priorities, values, and judgment. Silence provides the opportunity to witness these choices without influencing them. Words are rarely neutral. Silence, by contrast, is neutral but attentive, creating conditions in which authentic behavior is more likely to surface. Silence is also a tool for self-observation. In quiet, one becomes aware of internal reactions to external stimuli, thoughts, biases, assumptions, and impulses. This self-awareness allows the observer to separate personal projection from external reality, improving judgment. In conversation, the constant need to articulate responses may obscure internal recognition of truth, leading to reactive decisions or misinterpretation. Silence cultivates clarity, not only in observing others, but in understanding one's own perceptions. Patience is cultivated through silence. Patterns, consistency, and truth emerge over time rather than instantaneously. Conversation demands immediate responses and often prioritizes impression over accuracy. Silence allows for longitudinal observation, tracking how behaviors, choices, and responses unfold over repeated situations. Trust, integrity, and consistency are revealed gradually, and silent observation provides the temporal space necessary to witness these qualities. Silence also creates an environment for honesty and authenticity. Those who feel no pressure to respond immediately are more likely to act naturally. In dialogue, the presence of expectation can provoke defensiveness, posturing, or strategic communication. Silence removes this pressure, allowing authenticity to emerge. Observing in silence provides access to these natural tendencies, offering a clearer picture of character than conversation filtered through performance. The mind in silence is more capable of connecting seemingly unrelated information. Observations in quiet allow synthesis, pattern recognition, and strategic insight. When constantly speaking, the mind is focused on articulation, leaving little bandwidth for these deeper connections. Silence provides cognitive space for integration of perception, leading to understanding that is comprehensive rather than fragmented. In practice, silence does not mean withdrawal or apathy. It is a deliberate choice to observe before engaging, to prioritize perception over immediate reaction. By observing without interruption, one gains perspective, clarity, and insight. Words have power, but they are limited by intent and perspective, while silent observation collects information holistically, revealing truths that may otherwise remain hidden. Silence allows for discernment in trust. People reveal consistency, reliability, and integrity through behavior, tone, and nonverbal cues more reliably than through declarations. Conversation alone cannot expose subtle contradictions or hidden motives because words can be controlled, rehearsed, or manipulated. Silence, by creating space and attention, enables observation of genuine patterns, revealing who acts in alignment with principle and who acts according to convenience, fear, or self-interest. Through silence, one also cultivates influence. Observing first and speaking second allows responses to be deliberate rather than reactive. The observer understands context, motivation, and consequence, which enhances decision-making. Silence strengthens the ability to act strategically because it prioritizes clarity over impulse, understanding over performance, and insight over impression. Ultimately, silence is a tool for clarity, perception, and wisdom. It allows observation of behavior, emotion, and intention without interference from speech. Patterns emerge more clearly, authenticity surfaces more naturally, and judgment becomes more precise. By choosing observation over constant conversation, one gains understanding, insight, and perspective that words alone rarely provide. Discernment is wisdom, not bitterness, because it is the ability to see clearly, to separate truth from illusion, and to act with awareness rather than emotion. Many mistake careful observation and guarded judgment for cynicism or negativity. But discernment is not a reaction born of hurt. It is a deliberate practice of clarity. It is the capacity to evaluate situations, people, and choices objectively, guided by insight and principle rather than attachment, anger, or resentment. Bitterness arises from personal grievance, unprocessed disappointment, or desire for revenge, whereas discernment arises from awareness, experience, and careful consideration. Discernment requires distance, both emotional and cognitive. When one is too close to a situation or overly invested in the outcome, perception is clouded by desire, fear, or hope. Discernment allows for observation without interference from these biases. It creates a space where decisions are informed by reality rather than projection. This is not avoidance or detachment from life. It is the cultivation of clarity that allows one to act effectively while avoiding unnecessary harm. Those who are discerning do not rush to judgment or action. They measure, observe, and reflect, understanding that hasty conclusions often reflect personal emotion rather than objective truth. Experience is the foundation of discernment. Through repeated exposure to human behavior, patterns of reliability, deception, and motivation become visible. A discerning person notes the alignment between words and actions over time. They do not assume trustworthiness based on charm, rhetoric, or initial impression. They wait, observe, and allow character to reveal itself gradually. This patience is often misunderstood as coldness or suspicion, but it is an investment in accuracy. Bitterness, by contrast, is reactive. It forms quickly, fueled by perceived injury rather than careful observation, and often clouds judgment rather than sharpening it. Discernment also requires self-awareness. Understanding one's own desires, weaknesses, and emotional triggers allows for clear evaluation of others and circumstances. Without self-knowledge, judgment is distorted by projection, fear, or attachment. Discernment is the ability to separate personal bias from objective evaluation, to notice when decisions are being influenced by emotion rather than evidence. Bitterness, in contrast, merges emotion with judgment, producing decisions that are reactive, punitive, or protective in a destructive way. A discerning mind does not seek revenge or validation. It seeks truth and alignment. Boundaries are a natural outcome of discernment. Recognizing who can be trusted, which behaviors are acceptable, and where personal limits lie requires the ability to observe and assess. This is not about rejecting people indiscriminately, nor is it about assuming malevolence. It is about clarity and safety. Discernment allows one to engage selectively and effectively, preserving energy and focus for those situations and relationships that align with principles and values. Bitterness, in contrast, often leads to withdrawal, resentment, and hostility driven by past grievance rather than present awareness. Discernment also involves the willingness to learn from failure, observing where misjudgment occurred, reflecting on the signs that were missed, and adjusting behavior accordingly strengthens judgment. This iterative process deepens wisdom over time. Bitterness, however, fixates on the failure itself, often amplifying blame and perpetuating negative emotion. A discerning mind uses experience to guide future choice. A bitter mind uses it as a justification for cynicism and withdrawal. Emotional regulation is central to discernment. When observing others, a discerning person notices deception, inconsistency, or harm without reacting impulsively. They recognize the difference between offense and principle, between a minor slight and a structural problem. This calm observation allows for measured action rather than reflexive retaliation. Bitterness, conversely, is fueled by unresolved emotional reaction. It confuses injury with the totality of the person or situation, leading to judgments that are colored by resentment and often magnified beyond the original cause. Discernment requires humility. One must acknowledge that perception is limited and that no one sees the full truth at all times. This humility encourages listening, observation, and cautious evaluation. It prevents the arrogance that assumes all knowledge is possessed instantly. Bitterness often arises from perceived certainty, the belief that one has been wronged irreparably, and that the world or specific individuals are at fault. Discernment accepts complexity, ambiguity, and the possibility of error, while bitterness simplifies and judges prematurely. The practical applications of discernment are numerous. In relationships, it allows for the selection of trustworthy allies, the recognition of harmful patterns, and the avoidance of unnecessary conflict. In work or negotiation, it enables strategic observation, anticipation of motives, and informed decision-making. In personal development, it provides the insight to pursue growth opportunities and avoid distractions. Discernment functions as a protective mechanism, but it is not reactive defense. It is proactive awareness. Bitterness, in contrast, functions as a defensive mechanism rooted in emotional pain, often limiting growth and interaction. Discernment also protects against manipulation. A discerning person notices inconsistency, exaggeration, or hidden agenda, and evaluates information against evidence rather than rhetoric. This skill is developed over time and through attention, patience, and reflection. Bitterness, on the other hand, may make someone overly suspicious, defensive, or hostile, interpreting all interactions as potential harm rather than weighing evidence objectively. Discernment balances caution with openness, while bitterness tips towards suspicion and negativity. Observation over time is a hallmark of discernment. Those who are discerning do not leap to conclusions.